I was sitting in the barber's chair with my eyes closed, enjoying the familiar sound of scissors and the quiet hum of the radio in the background. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday afternoon, just a quick trim before heading home. Then Victor grabbed my shoulder hard and stopped cutting. His grip was so tight it almost hurt. "Leave now. Out the back. Don't ask why." I opened my eyes and looked at him in the mirror. The color had drained from his face. His hands were trembling. This was a man I had known for years, always calm, always steady. But right now, he looked terrified. "Victor, what's happening?" "They're coming. Go. Now." He pushed me out of the chair before I could say another word. I didn't understand what was going on, but something in his voice told me not to argue. I ran toward the back of the shop and out a door I had never noticed before. 15 minutes later, I stood across the street and watched as police cars surrounded the building with their lights flashing. That was the day I learned my ex-boyfriend had been planning to kidnap me, and a man I barely knew saved my life. Subscribe for more stories and tell me in comments, where are you watching from? My name is Sonia. I'm 24 years old and I live in a small town called Ridgewood, about an hour outside of Philadelphia. It's the kind of place where people still wave at each other from their porches and kids ride their bikes down quiet streets until the sun goes down. I grew up here with my mom, Gloria, and my younger sister, Petra. My dad left when I was 12. One morning he was there, and the next, he was gone. We never heard from him again. No calls, no letters, nothing. Mom raised us on her own after that, working double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital. She never complained. She just did what needed to be done. Mom always told us to trust our instincts. She said a woman's gut feeling is her best protection, and we should never ignore it. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now I understand exactly what she meant. I work as a receptionist at a dental office downtown. It's not exciting, but I like the people I work with, and the hours are steady. In the evenings, I take online classes, working toward a degree in accounting. I want to build something stable for myself. I want to give my mom the retirement she deserves after all those years of sacrificing for us. About a year ago, I started dating a guy named Derek. He was a mechanic at a shop on the edge of town, good-looking, confident, the kind of guy who made you feel like the center of his world when he looked at you. Everyone in town seemed to like him. He was always friendly, always helpful, always smiling. My mom was skeptical from the start, but I told her she was just being overprotective. For the first few months, things felt perfect. Derek was attentive and sweet. He brought me flowers for no reason. He remembered small things I mentioned and surprised me with thoughtful gestures. I thought I had found someone special. Then things started to shift. It happened slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice. Derek started asking where I was going whenever I left the house. He wanted to know who I was texting. He got quiet and moody if I mentioned a male coworker, even casually. Once, he picked up my phone while I was in the bathroom and went through my messages. When I confronted him about it, he said he was just curious, that it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal. The jealousy got worse. The questions got more frequent. He started showing up at my job unannounced, saying he just wanted to see me. It felt suffocating, like I couldn't breathe without him watching. 6 months ago, I ended things. I told him I needed space, that the relationship wasn't healthy. He didn't take it well. He called me constantly, left long voicemails that swung between anger and apology. He showed up at my apartment twice, once at midnight, banging on the door and begging me to let him in. I stopped answering. I blocked his number. Eventually, the calls stopped. The visits stopped. I thought he had finally moved on. I went back to my regular life. Every few weeks, I would visit a small barbershop on Main Street called Victor's Cuts. Victor was the owner, a quiet man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. He had been cutting hair in that shop for over 20 years. We never had long conversations, but he always remembered my name. He asked about my mom and sister. He made me feel comfortable in a way that felt rare and genuine. It was just a small part of my routine, something normal in an ordinary life. I had no idea that ordinary life was about to be shattered. About a month after Derek stopped contacting me, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Small things at first, the kind you try to explain away because the alternative is too unsettling to consider. There was a car I didn't recognize parked across the street from my apartment building, a dark blue sedan with tinted windows. The first time I saw it, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe someone had visitors. Maybe a neighbor got a new car. But then I saw it again the next morning, and the morning after that. It was always in the same spot, facing my building, like whoever was inside had a clear view of my front door. By the end of the week, I started leaving for work through the back entrance just to avoid walking past it. Then the phone calls started. Unknown numbers, always at odd hours. I would answer, and there would be nothing but silence on the other end. No breathing, no background noise, just empty air. After a few seconds, the call would disconnect. It happened 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. I changed my voicemail greeting, hoping whoever it was would leave a message and reveal themselves. They never did. I tried to convince myself it was just spam callers or some kind of glitch. But deep down, I knew better. There was a pattern to it, a feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. One evening, my sister Petra came over for dinner. She helped me make pasta, and we sat at my small kitchen table talking about her classes and her new job at the bookstore downtown. She seemed distracted, picking at her food instead of eating it. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at me with worried eyes. "I have to tell you something. I saw Derek today." My stomach dropped. "Where?" "Outside the grocery store on 5th Street. He was just sitting in his truck in the parking lot, not shopping, not doing anything, just sitting there. When I walked past, he smiled and waved at me like we were old friends." "Did he say anything to you?" "No, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. It was like he wanted me to see him, like he was sending some kind of message. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was probably nothing, that Derek was just running errands and happened to be there. But I couldn't make myself believe that, so how could I expect her to? After Petra left, I double-checked all my locks and closed every curtain in the apartment. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and rustle outside my window. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. A week later, I was walking to my car after work when I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a flyer, some advertisement for a local business. But when I pulled it out, I saw it was a handwritten note on a small piece of lined paper. The words made my blood run cold. "You think you can just forget about me? I'm always watching." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I knew exactly who had written it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. I drove straight to the police station and filed a report. The officer who took my statement was polite, but seemed almost bored, like he had heard this kind of story 100 times before. He wrote down everything I told him and said they would make a note of it in the system. "Without a direct threat of violence, there's not much we can do right now," he explained. "If he contacts you again, or if you feel you're in immediate danger, call 911. I left the station feeling more alone than ever. The system that was supposed to protect me couldn't do anything until something actually happened. By then, it might be too late. I started changing my habits. I took different routes to work each day. I asked my neighbor Trudy, a retired teacher who lived across the hall, to keep an eye out for anyone suspicious hanging around the building. I kept my phone charged at all times and checked over my shoulder everywhere I went. The fear became a constant companion, always there in the background, turning every shadow into a threat and every stranger into a potential danger. I was living my life in a state of quiet terror, and I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. That Saturday morning, I made a decision. I was not going to let Derek turn me into a prisoner in my own life. I had spent weeks looking over my shoulder, changing my routines, jumping at every unexpected sound. It was exhausting. I barely recognized myself anymore. The confident woman I used to be had been replaced by someone who was afraid of her own shadow. I decided to stick to my normal schedule. I was going to get my hair cut at Victor's Cuts like I always did on the last Saturday of the month. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt important. If I gave up every piece of my normal life, Derek would win without ever having to touch me. The drive to Main Street was quiet. It was a beautiful day, the kind of crisp autumn morning that usually made me feel grateful to live in a small town, but I couldn't enjoy it. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, scanning for the dark blue sedan or Derek's black truck. I didn't see either one. By the time I parked outside the barber shop, I had almost convinced myself that everything was fine. Victor's cuts looked the same as it always did. The old-fashioned striped pole spinning slowly by the door, the big glass window with gold lettering, the neat row of chairs inside. When I walked in, the familiar smell of aftershave and hair tonic greeted me like an old friend. There was only one other customer, an elderly man getting a shave in the corner chair. Soft jazz played from a small radio on the counter. Victor looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Good to see you, Sonia. Have a seat. I'll be with you in just a minute." I settled into the worn leather chair nearest the window and picked up a magazine, flipping through the pages without really seeing them. A few minutes later, Victor finished with the older man, who paid and left with a friendly wave. Then it was my turn. Victor draped the black cape over me and fastened it at the neck. "Just a trim today?" "Yes, please. Nothing fancy." He nodded and started working, his scissors moving with the easy rhythm of someone who had done this thousands of times. We made small talk about the weather, about how my sister's birthday was coming up next week, about a new restaurant that had opened on the other side of town. I closed my eyes and let myself relax for the first time in days. The snip of the scissors was almost hypnotic. Then Victor stopped cutting. His hand gripped my shoulder hard enough to make me open my eyes. When I looked at his reflection in the mirror, my heart nearly stopped. His face had gone pale. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on something outside the window. "Listen to me very carefully." His voice was low and steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. "I need you to get up and leave right now. Go out the back door. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just keep walking until you're far away from here." "Victor, what's going on? You're scaring me." He didn't answer my question. Instead, he pulled the cape off me and took my arm, guiding me toward the back of the shop. "Your ex-boyfriend Derek was here yesterday. He came in asking questions about you. What time you usually come in, how long you stay, whether you come alone." I didn't think much of it then. Thought maybe he was just trying to reconnect. But I just saw his truck pull up outside, and he's not alone. There are 2 other men with him. One of them has something under his jacket, and it's not a phone. My blood went cold. Every warning sign I had been ignoring, every strange occurrence over the past month, suddenly clicked into place. This was what Derek had been planning. He knew my routine. He knew I would be here. Victor pointed to a door behind a shelf of supplies. "That leads to the alley. Turn left and keep walking. Get somewhere safe and call the police." I wanted to thank him, wanted to say something, but there was no time. I pushed through the door and stepped into the bright sunlight of the alley, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The alley was narrow and lined with dumpsters and stacks of old cardboard boxes. The sunlight felt blinding after the dim interior of the barber shop. I turned left like Victor told me and started walking as fast as I could without breaking into a full run. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment, but I forced myself to keep moving. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and shallow, echoing off the brick walls on either side of me. Every few steps, I fought the urge to look back. Victor had told me not to, and I trusted him, but the fear of what might be behind me was almost unbearable. I imagined Derek rounding the corner, grabbing me by the arm, dragging me into his truck before anyone could see. The thought made me walk even faster. At the end of the alley, I turned onto a quiet side street I barely recognized. There was a small coffee shop on the corner called The Morning Grind. I had been there once or twice before, but never paid much attention to it. Right now, it looked like the safest place in the world. I pushed through the door and stepped inside, trying to catch my breath. The shop was nearly empty. A young woman with headphones sat typing on a laptop near the back. An older man read a newspaper at a table by the window. The barista behind the counter looked up and smiled at me, but her expression changed when she saw my face. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't know how to answer. I just nodded and moved toward the window, positioning myself where I could see the street outside without being too visible from the sidewalk. My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against the table to steady myself. From where I stood, I had a partial view of Main Street. I could see the corner of Victor's barber shop, the striped pole still spinning slowly by the door. Everything looked normal from this distance. For a moment, I wondered if I had overreacted, if Victor had been mistaken about what he saw. Then I heard the sirens. They came from both directions, wailing and growing louder by the second. Police cars raced down Main Street, their lights flashing red and blue. I watched as they screeched to a stop in front of the barber shop, blocking the road in both directions. Officers jumped out with their weapons drawn, shouting commands I couldn't hear from inside the coffee shop. I pressed my hand against the window, my breath fogging the glass. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst. I watched as the police surrounded the building, taking cover behind their cars. More sirens approached. An ambulance appeared at the end of the street, followed by another squad car. The next few minutes felt like hours. I stood frozen in place, watching the chaos unfold from a distance. I saw officers enter the barbershop through the front door. I saw them drag 3 men out in handcuffs, forcing them to the ground on the sidewalk. Even from this far away, I recognized one of them, Derek, his black jacket, his broad shoulders, the way he held himself even with his hands behind his back. It was him. The barista came up beside me, staring out the window with wide eyes. "What's happening out there?" "I don't know," I lied. I knew exactly what was happening. I just couldn't say it out loud yet. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Victor. I answered with shaking hands. "Sonia, are you safe?" "Yes. I'm at the coffee shop down the street. I can see everything from here." "Good. Stay there. The police have them. It's over." I thanked him, but my voice cracked before I could finish the sentence. Tears started streaming down my face, and I couldn't stop them. The barista brought me a glass of water and a napkin without saying a word. She just sat with me while I cried, a stranger offering silent kindness in the middle of the worst day of my life. It wasn't until later that night, after the police interviewed me and I gave my statement, that I learned the full truth. Derek and his 2 accomplices had entered the barbershop armed. One had a handgun tucked into his waistband. Another carried a hunting knife. Derek himself had zip ties and duct tape stuffed in his jacket pockets. They had been planning to take me. The police searched Derek's truck that night and found things that made my stomach turn. There was a printed map with my apartment building circled in red marker. There was a handwritten list of my daily routines, noting what time I left for work, what time I came home, and which days I visited the barbershop. There was a burner phone with text messages between Derek and his 2 accomplices, discussing how they would grab me and where they would take me afterward. The location they mentioned was an abandoned property 40 miles outside of town, a place surrounded by woods where no one would hear me scream. Derek had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. He had been watching me, studying my patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. And that Saturday at Victor's Cuts was supposed to be that moment. If Victor hadn't recognized the danger, if he hadn't trusted his instincts, I would have walked right into their hands. The trial began 4 months later. It was one of the hardest experiences of my life. I had to sit in the same courtroom as Derek, had to look at his face while I described everything he had put me through. He stared at me the entire time, his expression blank and unreadable. I refused to look away. I wanted him to know that I was not afraid of him anymore. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Derek was found guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, stalking, and illegal possession of a weapon. His 2 accomplices were convicted on similar charges. The judge called it a calculated and dangerous plan that could have ended in tragedy. Derek was sentenced to 12 years in prison. His friends received 8 and 6 years respectively. When the verdict was read, I sat between my mom and my sister in the front row of the courtroom. Mom squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't mind. Petra was crying quietly beside me. I felt something loosen in my chest, a weight I had been carrying for months finally lifting. It wasn't joy, it was relief, pure, overwhelming relief. A week after the trial ended, I went back to Victor's Cuts. The shop looked exactly the same as it always had, but everything felt different now. Victor was sweeping the floor when I walked in. He looked up and smiled, setting the broom aside. "There she is." I was wondering when you'd come back. I didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for saving your life? Words felt too small. I walked up to him and hugged him, something I had never done before. He patted my back gently and let me hold on for as long as I needed. You didn't have to do what you did, I said when I finally pulled away. You put yourself in danger for me. Victor shook his head. I've been cutting hair in this town for 25 years. I know trouble when I see it. That man had darkness in his eyes. I wasn't going to stand by and let him hurt you. I asked him how I could ever repay him. He just smiled and pointed to the chair. Come back for your next haircut. That's all the thanks I need. I still go to Victor's cuts every few weeks. We talk more now. He tells me stories about his late wife and his son who lives in Chicago. I tell him about my classes and my plans for the future. He's become more than just my barber. He's become family. My life is different now. I moved into a new apartment with better security. I check in with my mom and sister every day. I still look over my shoulder sometimes, but the fear doesn't control me anymore. I learned to trust my instincts, to pay attention to the warning signs, and to never ignore that feeling in my gut when something isn't right. Most importantly, I learned that kindness can come from unexpected places. Sometimes the person who saves your life is not a friend or a family member. Sometimes it's a quiet man with graying hair and steady hands who simply chose to pay attention when it mattered most. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.